All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this customer webinar going over our newest product, Keeper Connection Manager, and how it allows you to connect to IT infrastructure remotely. We've got Zane Bond here, our Senior Director of Product Management. And before he jumps on stage, just a few housekeeping items. So this is recorded, and we will send it to you after the session is over so that you can play it back and share it with anyone you would like. If you see in the bottom right corner, you'll see a chat button that you can talk amongst yourself, introduce yourself, and anyone there, as well as there's a questions one, which please, if you have any questions, drop it in there. It'll be easier for us to prioritize that. And you can also upvote if there's any questions that you would like to see answered quickly. So we will answer them throughout the webinar. We'll also have a session at the end just for Q&A as well, if you have any ones that pop up before then. But other than that, feel free to drop them in and we will get to them throughout the presentation. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Zane Bond to take it away.
All righty. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. The topic of the day is zero trust access to your infrastructure within your environment. So the general flow of today's webinar, we'll talk a little bit about connection management and some of the value that it brings. And then past that, we'll talk a little bit about use cases, and then I'll go into a demo. And I highly encourage any questions you guys have, just definitely jump in. The questions kind of keep it a little more lively, so I prefer the answering questions to give you guys the information you need. The first topic is, what is connection management, right? Within the industry, connection management has a couple of different names. It's either privileged session management, maybe privileged access management, depending on what you're looking at. But it's really the discipline of, securely connecting your technical users with your most sensitive assets in your environment, often called privileged assets. And whatever you need to do to get people access to these things, it's making sure that you're within regulatory and compliance frameworks, making sure that you're able to adhere to company policy, and then of course, just do business securely, but not have the solutions and products in the way of actually getting in the way of doing business. When we think about why is connection management important, the key component here is that the data in your environment is the most high value target for any adversary. So whether that's your maybe your source code, your customer lists, your credit cards, whatever that information is, that's typically the target that an adversary wants to get to. Many times when a breach occurs, it is some ancillary device or something else that gets compromised, like maybe somebody clicks on some ransomware or some malware, maybe an old unpatched server gets breached, but at some point, some system somewhere has been compromised, and now they're looking for the high value data that they can, leverage as best as possible. So at this point, they'll be on a server, they'll start looking around for, where's your build systems, where's your source code, where are your customer lists, credit cards, all those types of things. So they'll start with one particular component, and then they'll do some recon, look around, see what they can find, maybe some lateral movement, maybe some privileged escalation. Connection management really focuses on protecting the most sensitive assets in your environment and trying to completely shut down that attack chain by ensuring that access to these targets is locked down and that people can't get to them unless they have a good reason to. And then even if somebody does access it, you've got a full audit trail, you've got recordings, you've got all the forensic analysis to understand what was done on those targets if something does occur. The typical set of protocols that we access, or at least allow people to access, are the standard ones you would use in your environment. So the types of things your sysadmins and developers and engineers are using today are the exact types of connections that we're protecting. So if you have Windows machines, you'll have your RDP sessions. For any of your Linux or Mac, you may have some SSH sessions, and then some more specific protocols such as direct database connections through MySQL or container connections through Kubernetes. But whatever it is that your technical folk need to access, we use the native protocols. And this is really important when deploying some type of a solution, because you really have to understand, are you using something that your teams are used to? Is it something new? Is it challenging? Do I have to install agents? Do I have to reconfigure stuff? And the general answer with Keeper Connection Manager is no. Whatever you're using today, you can continue using. And the specific people that are accessing these targets may not necessarily be you, but they will be someone within your environment. Your more technical teams, so your developers, your DevOps teams, IT admins, just the people that either deploy your apps and systems to production, or the people that keep your systems running, Exchange servers, etc. Those are the folks that would best utilize this product. There are some additional use cases that are definitely interesting around this. Third-party access is a pretty good example that we run into fairly frequently. And in this case, imagine you have, I don't know, maybe an Oracle server, and this Oracle server is acting up, it's got some problems, and you need to bring in an expert, an Oracle expert, to troubleshoot and fix it. What are your current paths and avenues to do this right now? Many times, we'll just grant the person, temporary VPN access. We'll like, hey, here's VPN access, here's the server name, go ahead and get in there. The problem with that is that it's far too much access, right? Once you're on the VPN, you can access everything, and maybe you tell the contractor, hey, just promise that you're not going to access anything that you shouldn't. Here's the one server, and go from there. So that is, unfortunately, it happens fairly commonly where too much access is granted because you don't have the right controls around saying you can only access this one thing. Maybe a different path you go down is you'll do some kind of screen sharing, right? So you'll have one of your engineers sit on with the external expert, and they will, moderate the session and, help them get to where they need to. One of the problems with this is you now have two people that are out for, a whole day, a bunch of hours, several days, however long it takes to fix that. And even then, it's very difficult to just watch someone else work for an extended period of time. So you have the problem of, tabbing out, they're connected, just let them do whatever. And then you lose any oversight as to what potentially occurred there. So that's a fairly interesting use case that we're able to solve around third-party vendor access. But again, it's just anyone that needs to access your most sensitive systems, whatever they're doing today. If they're already RDPing in, SSHing in, we can put additional layers of security in front of those to really protect those assets a little more. Some of the initial capabilities when you log into the product, right? The authentication uses SAML authentication, so it looks and behaves much the same as you would authenticating into something else. So if you're using Okta for authentication, you can put Okta in front of Connection Manager. If you're using Azure Active Directory, again, you can just sign in with your AD login. Once you've authenticated, once you've done whatever your device challenge is, your multi-factor challenge, whatever your company policy is, then you can come in. Depending on the role you're in, depending on the groups you're in when you authenticate, you'll then see a list of connections, and you only see the connections that are authorized for you. So in the case of a third-party vendor, they would just see one, right? It'd be, hey, here's my Oracle server. Up top, you'll see, the most common connections, the things that you connect to day in and day out. We keep those up top because those are the things you're likely going to access later on. Once you're within a session, it looks and behaves much like RDP, much like natively being on the device. The solution that we use for our remote access is incredibly performant. It is very close to being natively on the device. So even on slower network connections or longer distances, you're able to absolutely connect to the devices, work through, do whatever you need, and it's really simple. And if you look here, How we're getting to it is just through a web portal. So I'm not installing a client on my client device. You also don't have to install agents on the targets. We have the bastion that sits in the middle, and it'll broker monitor that connection and even record it if you would like. When you set up and configure this, you're also able to say, pull these credentials from my vault. So if you have a Keeper Vault, it can pull the credentials from the Keeper Vault through Keeper Secrets Manager directly into this. And one of the key advantages here is that you're able to grant somebody access to a system without exposing the password to them, or without sharing the SSH key with them, or whatever authentication credentials you have to the target. You can configure that in the server, lock it down, and then say you're able to access this, but you'll never see the password to the server because you don't need to. You click connect and it just works. I'll show you in the demo in a couple of minutes. It's much easier to understand when you're seeing it. And then, of course, lastly, we have the audit trail, which covers, who connected, when did they connect, what did they do when they were in there, and if you really wanted to, you could view and play back the entire session, which is a really great capability. So again, quick little overview. I'll show you more when I get to the demo, but the core use cases that we look at here are connecting to target systems quickly and easily. So like I mentioned, as a user, you would just go to your URL to authenticate. You would sign in with your SAML or SSO, and then your list of targets would be there. You'll click on them and get to those devices. From an administration deployment perspective, you don't have the clients because I'm just using a browser. So Chrome, Edge, Firefox, etc. That's all people need to connect. And then the protocols that we're using the native protocols that you typically use to access these devices right now, which means no additional configuration is needed on the systems you're connecting to. If RDP works today, we can use Keeper Connection Manager and continue using that. If you have SSH with certificates, that's great. We'll continue using that. So it's a very easy to deploy solution because you're not having to reconfigure your target devices. You're not having to install agents or punch holes in the firewall. You now have the Keeper Connection Manager as like a bastion that exists, and that one device needs to access your targets, and everybody authenticates to that via the web portal. Another interesting use case is maybe you have a company policy of multi-factors required to authenticate to sensitive assets. Those are sometimes difficult to implement consistently. If you have MySQL databases, Kubernetes clusters, old VNC servers, putting an MFA challenge in front of those before you can access them is sometimes a difficult prospect. With Keeper Connection Manager and our SAML authentication, you're able to have a consistent authentication process where you're not having to worry about additional logins. What was the server name? What was the password? Did I save the key? All those things that it's really tough to remember. You authenticate with your Active Directory account, you see the devices, and you get it there. And if you want MFA challenges before that, you can absolutely enforce that at the login perspective. Another case we run into is from the virtual desktop infrastructure. This is fairly common in medical hospitals, schools, potentially labs, where you have a standard image of, hey, this is an image that everybody gets, and we've got some shared devices, and people need to authenticate to it, and it just spins up. This is really easy access to that infrastructure. You log into the portal. Once you've authenticated, you click on the device and you're in there. It'll launch a standard image, and everything's accessed remotely as you would normally. And then, of course, from a compliance perspective, every compliance framework out there, somewhere in the beginning, has some form of be smart with passwords, understand who has access to things, and make sure that you can understand what was done when access was granted. And from this, not only are you able to, of course, put in the company compliant multi-factor challenge in the front, you're able to put in the required monitoring of who connected, when they connected, who has access, who does not have access, but you can also record the entire session. So if something does occur, you have a complete recording which you can play back and understand exactly what occurred. One of the questions we get fairly frequently is, great, how do I deploy this? Well, first off, we have our gateway. It's a lightweight Docker container. You spin it up, you configure it, and you set up your connections there. The container that you configure is set up, and that component has access to the targets, and your clients, they only need access to the web portal. So once they access the web portal, nothing else is needed. So this actually allows you to restrict your access to your sensitive assets even further by saying, look, I've got a specific path of people need to authenticate to this before they can get to the source code systems, before they can get to our production and build systems. This allows you to further restrict and lock down the network so that any arbitrary person on the network cannot rotate or pivot into those devices or scan for them or ping them. They just won't be available. They'll be locked in appropriately. And from a deployment perspective, that's it, right? You're not having to install client devices, no agents, no playing with firewalls, because if you can RDP into it today, that's exactly what we'll use, and we'll leverage that and use the native protocols to communicate to the target devices. And just like you see here, it's really simple. You got your users, they log onto a web portal, the gateway sits there, and the gateway has access to your targets. There's not a specific set of additional firewall rules you need to punch in, and the gateway itself can pull directly from the Keeper vault. So you can store your credentials in a particular vault, and you can say these credentials are available to Connection Manager, and then whenever the connection occurs, it will pull them directly from the vault into the system and then broker that connection. When we think about the integration, you've got a couple options. So first off, you can say this device uses this password, or this SSH session uses this SSH key, and you can specify this UID in the vault, have at it. Another option you can have is you can have it pull it dynamically. So depending on the host name, depending on the IP address of the target system, when it attempts to connect, it'll actually query the vault and say, hey, for this system, give me the current credential, and it'll pull that right out of the vault as needed, which really allows you to not have to put in specific credentials for every target, or if you have multiple, you can just update them in the vault without additional configuration. It really makes things a little easier. From a pricing perspective, almost everything we do is per user. So this one's $25 per user per month. We have unlimited connections, credentials, integrations. You can configure the system and use it as much as you want. We don't have additional usage that goes on top of that. And of course, we have a free trial available. But now for the most fun part. I much prefer getting into the demo and showing you how the product works. So let me share my screen.
And then Zane, while you're pulling up, we did have a few questions rolling, and then if you could
excellent.
Jump to the questions tab and hit the mute notifications. We're just getting a little dings on the other end here.
Not a problem.
Thank you. All right. So while you're doing that, Peter asked, how does Connection Manager connect to the Keeper Vault?
Okay. So the our Keeper Secrets Manager product allows us to make certain credentials and certain secrets within your vault available to systems. So this is for build, deploy, runtime, your DevOps, those can all retrieve that programmatically. The Keeper Connection Manager uses that exact same methodology, the exact same infrastructure to pull that. So long story short, you create a shared folder with the appropriate credentials in it, and you say this folder is available to Keeper Connection Manager, and then that's exactly what it has access to. So the Connection Manager system does not see your entire vault. It doesn't pull everything. You carve out a specific set and say this is available for Connection Manager, and only those credentials show up.
Great. Another question from Christian is they installed KCM as a simple Docker install. Is there a Kubernetes deployment plan?
We're looking into different deployment models, whether that's maybe just running some native binaries, maybe continuing with Docker. It's something we're currently exploring the best way to make it easily deployable. So I don't think we have a Kubernetes deployment specifically planned, but it's good feedback. It's something I'll bring back to the team that we can look at.
Great. And then I think Peter's other question for where is the Keeper Vault located was answered in the first one you said. So we're good.
Absolutely. So the vault itself, if you want to, Keeper Connection Manager can be completely standalone. It can exist without a Keeper enterprise password vault. However, if you want the integration, it'll pull it directly from our cloud and pulls it down in a zero knowledge and zero trust way via our Keeper Secrets Manager. Alrighty, logging into the system. Just like I mentioned before, if you want to, you can have your SAML, but once you authenticate into the system and you're logged in, first thing you see is, hey, here are the connections, recent connections, the things you connect to most often, easy to get to, and then here's a list of all the connections. It's important to note that in the system, there's a lot more connections available, there's more folders available, but because of the team that I'm in, because of how I logged into the vault, these are the only things that I see right now. And what that does is it's, based on your role, these are the things you get. If I wanted to, I can connect to a Windows machine. There it is, it's available, and I've authenticated. One thing to note is that when I connected to the system, I did not type in a password. I did not have any particular authentication I had to provide. I just said, I want to get to this device. But if you look here, I'm authenticated as an administrator. You have all these standard things you would hope for with a remote tool. You can disconnect, save the session down here. Maybe you want to jump into a MySQL database. Don't have users, but you get the idea. The specific database commands that I can run, everything works there. And any of my open sessions, I can come back to them. So if I wanted to come back to my Windows session, that's fine. I can close it out. And then if I wanted to disconnect. Once I've disconnected from these sessions, you'll be able to see in the session history, here are the connections that occurred. Here was the Windows box. And if for some reason something went wrong on that target and I need to understand, all right, what happened, who did what occurred, here you can come through and replay the sessions. If you're in an SSH or a text-based session, you actually have the TypeScript saved, so you can search for particular commands in TypeScript. Or for the Windows session, you can just do the replay, but the replay works for everything. So we can also come back to our MySQL session, and here you can see, all right, what happened, what was typed, what occurred. So there are not only do you have the ease of access of, hey, here are my systems, here's how to connect to them. We completely abstract the password and the keys, so those are never exposed, and they're not even pulled down to the browser. So if somebody does get fancy with the browser and tries to do some inspection, they're not actually pulled to this target. They're pulled through Keeper Secrets Manager on the back end, so the server pulls them. They're never decrypted in the vault. And you're able to understand who did what did they occur, how do things go. Those are the high-level components. When we look at a particular connection, and here I'll just pick here we go, I'll pick this one. When I look at a particular connection, obviously you can specify what protocols are you going to connect with. Depending on the protocol you select, there are different options. So in the case of RDP, you can configure concurrency. Hey, how many people can connect at a time? If I've got a load balancer, am I going to have some specific weight? Do I need proxy information? And here you see the general network connection, which is how am I authenticating to this target? And again, the username and the password is not here. It's pulled directly from Secrets Manager. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't get them out of the system. There's a whole series of additional things specific to remote desktop, using the gateway, starting programs when you started, adjusting the appearance, the background. Do you want to enable or disable clipboard copy? Do you want to retrieve the audio from the target device? Do you want to enable file transfer? So file transfer with Keeper Connection Manager is really easy. You just take a file and you drag it onto the browser, and poof, there it shows up on the target device in the appropriate folder. And then if you want to set up remote app is specifically allows you to share just an application as opposed to the whole desktop. So maybe you've got an old AS400 terminal that you want to make available, and here what you can do is have just that one application available, and that's all that's shared. So effectively be close to launching it natively on your device, except it'd be remotely on the target. And then of course, where do we say the screen recordings, file transfer. Do you want to enable wake and LAN? Maybe the device is powered off. When you click the connect button, it'll turn it on. So those are just a quick overview of some of the settings and how you can configure these devices, along with usage of the system, typing, accessing, single sign-on, the alerts, the reporting, and that's the highest level overview of Connection Manager. Let's jump back into some of the questions and let's see where we can go from there.
Yep, we've got some good ones rolling in. So a couple in regards to recording. So where are the recordings saved, and how long will they be, how long will they be saved?
Okay, so the recordings are configured per connection. So you can turn them on or off per connection, and then you decide where they're saved in the configuration. But the general answer is they're saved on the Connection Manager server that you have configured, and they're there as long as you keep them there. If you have like a policy where you want to ship them off somewhere, you can SFTP them somewhere or transfer them, however. But the bastion that is set up as the Connection Manager server, that stores the recordings, and whatever hard drive space you make available to it is there. We're looking into some roadmap items around automatically uploading them to the cloud and encrypting them. But where it stands right now, this is how they exist.
Great. And what about multiple user connections to a single host?
Yes, absolutely. So you've got a couple of different options, right? If you have open sessions, you can go into the active sessions and join into existing ones. If you configure it, you can say that you only allow one person concurrently. Maybe it's like a real fragile server and you don't want a whole bunch of people jumping in. You can configure that. But as far as multiple users into a session, absolutely. You can have several users in a session. You can configure someone with view-only access so that they can see what's going on but not affect the session. And then there's a really weird one where if you wanted to, you can open up multiple sessions and send the same set of commands to a whole bunch of sessions at the same time, which is a fairly niche use case, but it's a cool functionality.
Nice. Okay. And then do you need to have both Connection Manager and Secrets Manager for this to function?
So you don't need to. However, if you're hoping to pull the credentials from the vault, Secrets Manager is how the credentials are pulled. So if you want to keep your Connection Manager standalone, you just want to use it, that's perfectly fine. If you have a vault in Secrets Manager, you can leverage those to pull the credentials from the vault.
Perfect. Another one from Tristan. Is there a plan to simplify the way connections are created to provide an API or some automation?
We are looking into several things for that. So being able to import the connections, absolutely. Also, just from discovery, we recently introduced Amazon EC2 discovery. So in this case, you would be able to run a configuration where it would look through your Amazon instances and create the appropriate assets, or create the appropriate connections for you. So in this case, you actually don't do anything. You just create the EC2 instance discovery. It pulls everything in there. All the devices show up there, and you'll just access them. So Amazon was the first discovery that we built. We're looking to expand it across into other types of discovery, where effectively we find what's out there, we create the connections for you, potentially we find the accounts, and we'll create those accounts for you and set those together.
Great. Okay, we've got a ton of great questions rolling in, so let's keep this
Sure.
going. Can you use your own credentials and thus use the connection manager only as secure jump host?
If you want, yes. So one of the common use cases we run into is that people will set up Active Directory authentication to keep a connection manager. And so you, whatever you authenticate with, those credentials can be used as pass-through credentials to the targets. So I authenticate to the portal as, domain/username, and then any of the sessions I have, I configure them to have pass-through credentials, and whatever I authenticated with gets passed through to the targets. So, domain/username. It's really a common use case for remote desktop, right? You don't typically have domain accounts as often on like Mac and Linux boxes, but for Windows, it's really common. Like the most likely username you're going to use in any RDP session is your domain account, and pass-through just works seamlessly.
Cool. Next one is, can a SAML login used to connect to KCM also be used to connect to the VM?
Let's state that one again, if you don't mind.
Can the SAML login used to connect to KCM also be used to connect to the VM?
Yes. No. So what you would do is the SAML authentication used to get into the portal would provide access to those targets. Those targets would be configured with however your authentication is. So it could be SSH key, could be a username, but just like I mentioned with the pass-through, if you authenticate with Windows, you can do pass-through, which would actually effectively have the same login on the target. So that's probably the most common use case we run into around just using the same login there, but they can be the same there, but it's fairly common for them to be separate.
Okay. And another quick recording question. How much space do you need on KCM for the recordings?
The recordings really depends on what you do. When we think about session recordings in the industry, the protocol that we have for our recordings is one of the most space efficient in the industry. We're talking, like a couple of megabytes for minutes and minutes of recordings. It's incredibly small compared to many other video formats. So it really depends on how often your connections are. What are you doing? What's going on? Are you watching video in the sessions? There's a lot of unknown variables that would cause the recordings to be bigger or smaller. But when we think about of any recording out there, of any solution out there, we have the smallest footprint in file size.
Good. Okay. And then I think there's one that I missed earlier. What about passwords entered during a session on the target system? Are they visible in the replay, or can I disable replay for certain systems?
So if a password is typed in, those will show up in the recording. The operating systems, especially like SSH sessions, they have various protections in place that prevent you from seeing passwords as they're being typed. But anything that is typed into a session is captured, and so that would include any authentication you type in there.
Got it. Okay. And then can we use connection managers IPs to restrict access to remote resources by IP?
Yes, you're able to. Especially with maybe if you use Azure conditional access or something, you can set up a whole set of rules for things that need to be in place in order to access the Connection Manager portal. And then once you're authenticated, you'll see the appropriate devices.
Perfect. All right, they keep rolling in.
Excellent.
Can you connect to MySQL Server using MySQL Client through Connection Manager, or only terminal, or is only terminal available for MySQL?
All right. So there's a couple of components to this, right? If we looked through the demo here, when I'm connecting to when I connect to a MySQL system here, what I'm using is the MySQL protocol, and I'm creating basically a shell to the target. This is one methodology. If you have a client, maybe a GUI or a thick client that you look at, you can either provide full access to a box that has the client installed, or you can use the remote app capability, which allows you to just provide that client and its appropriate configuration first to launch. So you've got a couple of options around what you do with those types of access.
Great. Okay. Next one. Based on your multi-user answer, you need to set up specific connections and endpoints in KCM, such as that two users that can hit the same host with different users and or profiles.
Yeah, by default, if I have some open sessions, like I can just jump into it, especially being an administrator. So here, here's my list of devices. I can see it's currently in use by one user. So you have availability to see what's going on before you connect to a target. Also, if you're an administrator, you can look at all active sessions, and from here you can join the session, or if you really wanted to, you could end the sessions. So maybe somebody forgets to close it out, you have the ability to jump in to help them or kill the session if they forgot to.
Awesome. Okay. Next one is there a marketplace image to enable quick deployment of the gateway in cloud data centers such as Azure or AWS?
And there's not, but that's a great idea. We're looking to continue to make deployment of the solution as easy as possible, right? So yeah, you don't have to have a client, you don't have to install target devices, but even the Bastion itself needs to be really easy to deploy and configure and get up and running. And there are various things we're looking into to make that easier. Using in like an AWS AMI or something, I don't think that's the path we're going to go up front, but we are going to make sure that deployment of the solution is as easy as possible. So maybe it's just a binary, setup.exe, next, and then it's running and it's working. We're still looking into ways to make sure that the deployment is as easy as it can be.
Great. All right. Remote desktop session through browser must be very slow for someone that is working full-time through simple remote desktop. So what is the performance on the browser for remote desktop? Also, does it work on multiple screens?
Multiple screens, it does work. I believe there's a screen switching option. So as far as performance goes, it's hard to describe how fast it is and how responsive it is, especially over a long session. So the use case of like virtual desktops that we run into, this is, you have a thin client, you have a dumb machine, or you have a shared machine that has nothing on it. You launch a session, maybe it's an RDP into the box, and then when you set it to be full screen, that becomes your session for the day. And you can use that all day. It's incredibly responsive. I think the best answer to this is try it out. We have free trial on the website, and any solution I've used in the past, I've never used a solution that is as fast as this. And if I have found a solution that's as fast as this, it's because they're literally using this technology, the same technology under the hood.
Great. If you currently only have the password vault, you'll need either KSM plus the integration or both. I think we already answered. You don't necessarily need KSM, but
Correct. Yeah. If you have a vault and you want to pull things from the vault, you can have Secrets Manager to enable the connections between the two, and then obviously Connection Manager you'd set up. So you would have all three.
Perfect. All right, some more. Can I copy files to my text-only server or on Windows Linux graphical desktop?
You can copy files. So maybe you have like an SSH session open, right? Like I've got um, right here. So how do I send a file here? Well, the same answer, assuming you have the file mapping configured in the configuration, you just drag and drop, and then, depending on how it's configured. So, I'm sorry, I clicked on the session instead of the configuration of the session. So wherever you configure, the file mapping, figure that one out. Let me pick a. Here's my session recordings, and so wherever I configure the files, the directory where the files go, that's where the drag and drop will throw them. Sorry, brain got a little stupid there.
Cool. All right. So how about key combinations in a browser session? RDP in full screen will transport it to the server, but how about in browser? Will it be sent to the server?
Yes. So your standard key combinations that you send through are transposed, especially if you're in full screen. It's like natively being on the device. And then we have a special key combination. So if you look here, we'll jump into, I guess, this guy. If you look here, we have the Control Option Shift because I'm on a Mac. This will be the specific session that pulls up the menu, but any of the standard key combinations I send through will work there. You can also clipboard, like copy and paste. If you want to understand the clipboard between the two, that's fine. And you have a couple of additional settings here for how to configure what's going to occur key combination wise. But the general answer is the keys that you press are passed through to the targets.
Perfect. All right, we're coming towards the end of them, just a few more. So is there an on-prem solution for the KCM server?
So the Connection Manager server is it's that lightweight Docker container, so it is on premises. It has the ability to talk to the Keeper Cloud to bring the credentials there, but the actual Connection Manager itself is entirely, it's a bastion that you install in your environment.
Perfect. All right. And then is it possible to have folders under all connections?
Yes, you're absolutely able to set up folders and groups. So I can set up a group of devices under my connections, and then this would allow things to be grouped together, and I can make those available to a particular set of people. Like, all right, here's the QA group, and I'm going to have all of those things exist in there. And then when you expand that folder, you'll be able to see them. I didn't have them set up in here, but yes, it works much like a tree.
Perfect. Okay,
All right.
2 more questions. Are there any automations to store the replay logs in an immutable place to comply? For example, ISO 27001 audit?
That's okay. So the spirit of that requirement is that the target device that could potentially be compromised needs to have its audit trail stored somewhere else, right? So imagine you've got a server somewhere. If that server gets compromised, you really can't trust the logs on that device. What's happening here is you're connecting through a bastion. So the target device, which is my RDB session, that device does not store the recording. The bastion does. So that already satisfies the the requirement of, the thing that can be compromised isn't there. And then any of the recordings that exist on the Bastion, easily able to set it up. Maybe you want to stream it to an S3 bucket. You can rsync them or whatever you need there to get those to additional locations. But I think the spirit of that requirement is that the recordings are not stored on the target devices, which are potentially compromised. They are stored on the connection manager server.
Awesome. And then is there any more benefit than the connection to KSM compared to plain Guacamole?
Oh, there's a whole series of things, right? So compared to Guacamole, we have obviously the new connection type, which is the MySQL, the integration with Secrets Manager, the new UI, the look and feel, additional enterprise features, AWS EC2 instance discovery, and a whole bunch of things we're doing on the roadmap to accelerate it. So the value of Connection Manager above Guacamole is pretty significant now and growing day by day.
Perfect. And then the last question that's in here. So if any of you have any final questions, go ahead and throw them in. Otherwise, we'll start wrapping up. But are the logs read-only?
So within the UI, absolutely. So these the connections and the history here. I cannot delete things from the history. I cannot remove them. I can export a CSV of what occurred, but the logs themselves are read-only, and the recordings are read-only. Now, if I have admin access to the file system, obviously you can move the files, delete them, do whatever you want with them after the fact. But from the user experience, they are read-only.
Awesome. Okay. It looks like the questions have kind of slowed down. That was an awesome session of questions. So thank you to everyone who put one in. So we are going to start wrapping this up. I'm going to put a poll on the screen right now, just asking if you would like a custom demo of KCM with your customer success manager. Feel free to hit yes on that, or if you wouldn't, just go ahead and click no or skip, and we'll get that set up right for you. And I think I heard a couple more chats come in. Let me make sure those aren't any final questions. Nope, I think we are all good. So thank you everyone for joining us. Like Zane mentioned, if you want to start a free trial, feel free to go on our website, and then you can do the products drop down, and you'll see Keep a Connection Manager from there. And then there'll be a bright button saying start your free trial. So you can go ahead and play around with everything that Zane showed you. If you have any issues, go ahead and reach out to your CSM as well, and appreciate you joining. So thanks to Zane for going through all this awesome tech.
Yeah, well, thank you all for attending.
All right, everyone enjoy the rest of their day.